First of our Bible readings this morning is from Paul's letter to the Philippians, chapter 3, and starting at verse 17. Join with others in following my example, brothers, and take note of those who live according to the pattern we gave you. For, as I have often told you before, and now say again, even with tears, many live as enemies of the cross of Christ. Their destiny is destruction. Their God is their stomach, and their glory is in their shame. Their mind is on earthly things. But our citizenship is in heaven, and we eagerly await a Saviour from there, the Lord Jesus Christ, who by the power that enables him to bring everything under his control, will transform our lowly bodies so that they will be like his glorious body. Therefore, my brothers, you whom I love and long for, my joy and crown, that is how you should stand firm in the Lord, dear friends. And the second reading is from Luke chapter 13 and starting at verse 31. At that time, some Pharisees came to Jesus and said to him, "Leave this place and go somewhere else. Herod wants to kill you." He replied, "Go tell that fox, I will drive out demons and heal people today and tomorrow, and on the third day I will reach my goal. In any case, I must keep going today and tomorrow and the next day, for surely no prophet can die outside Jerusalem. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you, how often I have longed to gather your children together, as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing. Look, your house is left to you desolate. I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, 'Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.'" Thanks be to God for his word.
So, turning to the gospel reading, what's going on? That's what you usually see in TV soaps and things like that when there's some sort of involvement with something apparently incongruous. But perhaps we can say it about today's gospel too. It opens with the Pharisees, and you can hardly call them bosom friends of Jesus, warning him to make himself scarce because Herod is after his blood. Why should they do that? It's not clear that they actually want Jesus dead at that stage, but they seem to make a lot of effort into putting him off his stroke, asking questions which are, to say the least, potentially awkward for him to answer, and doing all they can to drive a wedge between him and his followers. And I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to give a completely definitive answer because the commentaries I've looked at don't all agree with each other. Are the Pharisees just using this as a lever to get Jesus out of the way? Do they resent the way that crowds of people are starting to mull round him? Or are they genuinely concerned about his safety? The safety of one who disturbs the settled order of things and consequently puts his own life in danger. Whatever the interpretation of the reason for the warning, Jesus remains resolute, telling the Pharisees that they can tell that old fox Herod that he will continue on his chosen path until the third day. But then he seems to break into a lament for the city about which he cares so much, a city which will, of course, be his final destination on this earth. Some may see this as one of the most intimate references to God that you can find in the Bible. Jerusalem has a particular hold on Luke, or so it appears, for he mentions it in his writings far more times than the writers of the other Gospels put together. Possibly he mentions it here as a means of foreclosing its being laid waste by the Romans in AD 70. That might depend though on when you think Luke's Gospel was written. My commentary gives more or less convincing arguments for all sorts of dates between about AD 60 and the beginning of the 2nd century AD. So it's possible that Luke wrote these words knowing what fate was going to befall Jerusalem. And what happened in AD 70 may be a consequence of its having become just as corrupt as anywhere else. With some change and reform, it could have remained the city of the great king, the joy of the whole earth, as Psalm 48 puts it. It could have set an example to the whole world of many things that were good: justice, peace, integrity, holiness. But over a period of hundreds of years, the prophets have remarked on its corruption, and it doesn't sound as though a lot had changed when Jesus made his remarks. And this surely set the scene for its partial destruction. But I like to think about what things like that say to us today. To look at it in chronological order, is the incident warning about Herod's presumed intentions a reminder to us that we need to proceed cautiously in life's great race? I remember in my teens having a friend who was just a little bit older than me. He and I got on really well for most of the time, but one day he expressed the belief that I was rather naive for my age, which was probably true at the time. And one day he said to me, "When you go out into the world, you will meet people who will want to cheat you and do all sorts of other undesirable things to you. I can't see you ever coping with that." Well, that was a long, long time ago, and I would like to think that I've risen to the challenge a bit better than his gloomy forecast suggested. But we know that there are those out there who wish us harm or wish themselves good at our expense. Just think of all those scams that people enter into. So may our reaction be to pray for the wisdom to deal with situations like that in our day-to-day lives. Maybe another part of the challenge is to do all this whilst maintaining a tender heart, just as Jesus did. I once read a book in which an elderly doctor, the GP, was described as being tough as whalebone. And yet this same doctor could be what, in a different age from ours, was termed as tender as a woman towards his needy patients. One of my heroes when I was young was a vicar who I'm happy to say is still with us. In fact, he turns 90 this year. He made me realize that gentleness and tenderness could be present in men as well as women. I hate to say some of this because it sounds like sexual stereotyping, but he's what we used to call in my young days a man's man. He had been in the RAF, loved sport, played golf with a group of gentlemen friends, and tinkered about with car engines in the days when he reckoned they were less complicated than they are today. And yet anybody who knew him remarked on how kindly and tender his demeanor was. I had another long-standing friend. Now, he sadly isn't with us anymore. He was a retired GP, and he would have been in seventh heaven during the season of Six Nations rugby. And yet he once also told me that he cried at Call the Midwife on television. I still look on them as two of my favourite role models. I never did manage to take up golf. I don't think my physical coordination quite allows it. But I do hope that some of what I've learned from them has rubbed off on me as I've grown older. Can there be a life lesson for each of us to follow? It doesn't matter what our gender is, that you can combine toughness and caution with the loving tenderness that Jesus showed in his lamentation for Jerusalem. So to come back to Jerusalem and reflect on what it might have been without its corruption, could it be saying to us that we need to have places, people, and things that we cherish as we continue our pilgrimage? Maybe there's some advantage in us knowing at least a little bit about the history of the church in general, and that might include some particular reference to the branch of the faith that we follow. When I was training to become a local preacher, it was actually in the quite early days of faith and worship, which has been superseded now. But there were, sections on the origins of Christian worship and the development of Christianity since the time of Christ in a work that was called The Bright Succession. I have to say I knew very little really about either subject before I took up the course. And maybe I should have made a conscious effort to learn about our origins at an earlier stage. But we don't just live in the past, of course. It's been good in recent years when churches have prepared mission statements. I'm not all that keen on management talk, but there is some advantage in the preparation of a mission statement and the debate that might go with it. It might amount to the first time in a very long time that a church has taken stock of its activities. It's been able to work out what it values and how it interprets these values as it ministers to the world. It can give us a tangible way to have a look at the work that we do and whether we do it in a way that's consistent with our professed desire to show God to those who might not otherwise see him. We can think about whether we're a church that makes people welcome when they come together for worship, which I found this morning, this one definitely is. Whether we may need to spend more time outside the confines of the church buildings. Whether love has a strong enough place in our lives. And we don't need just to have things and ideas that we cherish. We need to cherish people, past and present. In the days when I was in Brighton and Prado Circuit, which was then separate from the rest of Tynedale, I used to preach regularly at what was then Robert Young Memorial Church in Corkrook. As I stood in its old-fashioned large central pulpit, my eye line led me in the direction of a memorial plaque to its founder, the Reverend Robert Young. Other churches carry reminders of those who've gone before us. When I was sitting over there, I saw one to, yes, Reverend William Gibson. I, for one, can feel very humbled when I reflect on the succession of witness that I'm following, as evidenced by those echoes of past congregations. And we mustn't overlook what we can learn from more recent role models from past and present. Just to pick an example, what better place than this circuit to briefly pay tribute to Reverend Peter Wright. Unfortunately, I didn't get to know Peter properly until the two circuits came together, so quite a late stage in his life. But I made friends with him and recall learning so much in both formal settings, such as meetings, and more informally over coffee. And although Peter has now moved to the next stage of his pilgrimage, there are others out there now who can affect our lives for the better. We all know them. There are those who come and faithfully worship, no matter what the weather is or what their state of mind is. Those who have a kind word or two for us when we arrive at or leave an act of worship. Those who reliably inquire after us if we're a degree or two under. Let's give thanks to God for those people who enrich our lives in their own great and small ways. For they're the kind of people who make our church a place of peace and justice and integrity and holiness. But will this be enough? Even as we learn to cherish the things and people who make us what we are, can we avoid heading towards what at least looks like a continual partial decline of the church? Did Jerusalem suffer a decline because it didn't see the need to change? Does the church have to change? Will each of its individuals have to change? Will Ian Warburton have to change? And will it hurt? Possibly. But just think of how much change we've all adapted to already. I was asking one of my neighbours how far back she could remember, and she told me that she remembered quite well moving house when she was 4. And I can remember back to about the same time myself, which I'm sorry to say takes me right back to the early 1950s. At that time, my parents had a gas cooker and a wireless set. No TV, no phone, no car. My poor mum didn't even have a washing machine. They gradually acquired these things over the next 20 years or so. and there must have been innumerable families in the same position. But many of us know we have our cars and we have things like computers, iPods, iPads, and goodness knows what else. These are certainly things that can help us enjoy life if we use them sensibly. But their arrival in the home has meant that many of us have had to learn new ways of doing things. For my age, I'm in pretty good health generally, but unfortunately, I've got type 2 diabetes. It's well managed and it doesn't stop me from doing anything. To start with, they put me on tablets, but then they put me on self-medication of insulin. So it meant that I had to learn how to do that. And whilst I'm a bit of a technophobe at heart, I did a couple of computer courses when I realized it was becoming essential to learn computer skills for work. And that also led me in the direction of social media, a path which many other feet have trodden in recent times. But how do we need to embrace change more generally? Do we need to review things such as whether we're using church premises as effectively as we might? How much might the pressure of external events compel us to look afresh with our relations with other denominations? Actually, I see some of this happening already. Last Sunday, for the first time in my life, I preached in a parish church because the Methodist URC at Wark is using St. Michael's for its services. That was completely different, and I must admit I loved it. But will Sunday morning worship or evening worship still be the best time to get everybody together in the future when you think how the nature of Sundays is changing in so many ways? Will we need to keep under review our attitude to the great social issues of the day? Does anyone doubt we still have plenty of changes and challenges waiting for us both in and out of church? But just think how we adapted to the restrictions posed on us by the pandemic. Who'd have thought we'd have learned how to use Zoom and other online platforms, or make new improved use of phone services so effectively? So the good news is that change is possible. But maybe the whole issue is that changes and challenges make life interesting and have the power to make us think again about our relationship with God. And God will help us as we change. Didn't he institute one of the biggest changes ever known when he sent his son to be crucified to show us that sin and death could be conquered? Can we show ourselves able to rise to the many challenges that worthwhile change is likely to bring? I'd just like to close by reminding you of the first verse of a hymn which goes, "All my hope on God is founded. He doth still my trust renew. He through change and chance has guided, only good and only true. God unknown, he alone calls my heart to be his own." Amen.